Welcome to the ThunderCast, your Marshall Athletics podcast produced by the fans, for the fans, with your hosts, Russ Livingood and KD Hudnall. We're bringing you the thundering word on the thundering herd each and every week, so keep it right here. The ThunderCast is on the loose. Thanks for downloading another episode of the ThunderCast. You can follow us on Twitter at ThunderCast_pod. Russ, let's just get right to it, right? We've got a rubber meets the road game this weekend. Herd's going down to Mobile, Alabama. They got to face South Alabama for the first time ever, right? And two teams have never played before, so this is one of those box checkers. We're still getting into the era of playing teams for the first time since we've changed to a new conference now in the second year. And there are very few teams left, but South Alabama is one of them. And I've got a nice little tidbit at the end to share on that front. If you've been injured in a car wreck, visit 304carwreck.com on the web or on Facebook. What happens when an Ohio driver crashes into a West Virginia driver in Kentucky? That can be a mess. But if you can dream it up, Jason and Matt have probably been there, done that, and gotten their clients paid. Don't fight the insurance companies alone. Contact Jason and Matt at 304carwreck.com. The game, of course, is going down this Saturday, November 18th, 5 p.m. on ESPN Plus if you're not going to go to the game. This team and Marshall are really, really similar. And not just on the record, but both of them are currently 5-5. South Alabama has a little bit better conference record. They're 3-3. But they're also very similar to the point that I think both teams have underachieved this year versus what they thought their records would look like. Remember, last year, South Alabama was a 10-win team, and Marshall was a 9-win team. High expectations that, while both did compete early on for the Sun Belt, their respective Sun Belt conference divisions. Marshall was kind of out of it earlier. We saw Troy clinch the West this past weekend, so we know that one's out of the gate. The East is still up in the air, but we've got some common opponents. The Herd and South Alabama have two common opponents. One we've already played, one yet to play. But let's talk about those quick three losses that are on the resume. For South Alabama, they lost to James Madison, they've lost to Troy, and they lost to Louisiana. So if that gives you a gauge of kind of where South Alabama falls in the hierarchy. Now, those common opponents, both of us lost to James Madison. They lost 31-23. We know the Herd lost 20-9 in a game without Rasheen Ali, and a game that Cam Fancher was noticeably limited with his mobility. And then the next common opponent is Arkansas State, who the Herd will face next week, depending, not depending, but it could change how that game is viewed based on the outcome of this one. But South Alabama did get the win over Arkansas State, 21-14. ESPN Power Index does not like the Herd. Just 28.9% chance to win for Marshall in a road game. The Herd is plus 10.5. with an over-under 48.5, which leads you into that 29-19 type score. And before we go into some bullet points, I want to ask you something, because that is a big spread. And I think I have an idea why that might be. I want to hear why you think the Herd might be plus 10.5.
I think that right now, we're uncertain at quarterback in Vegas's eyes with, does Fancher come back? And if so, he was noticeably had fallen off on his production over a few years. Also coming back from an injury, would he be at 100%? If it's Pennington, it's his second ever career start. He didn't throw a touchdown last game. That's not me commenting on either one of them. That's Vegas, who, they look at all this stuff, injuries and things like that. I think that that's the big thing, that it's on the road, that we, until last week, had a horrible stretch of trying to score. And I think that they're looking at that and saying, hey, it's uncertain here. at quarterback. We don't know who's going to start. We don't know if it's going to be both of them playing. We don't know if one will be at 100%. You haven't gotten a lot of touchdown production out of either one of them over the last 4 weeks, and I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, I think it's actually that maybe they think that Cole is actually going to get the start, and that he is going to have to go on the road in his first ever road start and play against a really good defense in South Alabama. And I'll talk to about some of those points earlier. I'm not sure too many folks are paying attention to how good this South Alabama defense really is. I know I had my eyes opened a little bit during the course of my preparation, and that is a big factor. It's not just necessarily who Marshall's fielding offensively, it's who South Alabama is fielding defensively and the fact that they're at home. So I I do think that it leans heavily towards the quarterback. I still, can't 100% say no. Cam's not going to play. It's going to be Cole Show because we don't know.
Mm-hmm. We don't know.
I listened to the Locked On Sunbelt podcast earlier this week with our buddy Dave Schultz, and the episode is the beginning of the Cole Pennington era, and he actually mentioned us in the show. I don't know if you got to listen to it, but he said,
Not yet.
Leading into the week to 75 week, he said nobody was talking about Cam Fancher not playing. He said, I follow Luke Creasy pretty closely. I follow the guys from the ThunderCast pretty closely, and nobody was saying anything. Well, the reason for that is nothing was said. Nobody knew, so it was a surprise to everybody until basically game day that we even knew that this was a possibility that Cole Pennington can start. So there is absolutely no surprise that we're not hearing anything this week either. But that spread really opened your eyes up a little bit to thinking, okay, maybe they know something we don't, because, well, they usually do.
And I'm full on board with not disclosing that. I would rather be in the dark and everything if it gives us an advantage as a team. And, I've talked plenty before, two drastically different styles of quarterback. You've got one is more mobile and he's left-handed, whereas the other one is right-handed and he's more of a traditional pocket passer. Not that he can't run. It's just that's, you look at Cam and what he does, he is elusive in the backfield.
Yep.
He can throw on the run. Cole is a freshman, and that's different than Cam, who has about almost a year and a half full now that he's got. So that's just different preparation. Everything about it's different. And if I'm our coaching staff, I don't let on who's going to play or anything either. We say it all the time. We are not insiders. We have been fortunate enough to have people in the athletic department and coaching staffs of various athletic sports at Marshall give us time for interviews and stuff like that. But we would rather stay in the dark and give the fans perspective. And I'm glad that we didn't know until the day of the game. And I kind of wished it would have been a surprise, just because that would have been even less time that Georgia Southern could have prepped for a possibility of Cole last week.
I'm not sure you're going to get any true preparation when it's game day. It's not like you can go out there and have a quick practice or anything, but I know, coaches are compensated well to game plan, and they're intelligent individuals, so they can make some last moment tweaks and things they want to do defensively just to accentuate already the strengths that exist on their defenses. But anyway, the last bullet point, well, I didn't really make one, but this goes without saying, 2 5-5 teams matching up. Winner of this one gets bowl eligible. That's the biggest storyline in this game, right? We both have something important to play for. Neither one of us can go to a Sun Belt Conference championship game. So you're trying to alleviate the stress of needing a final week win. You want to get it, but if you don't win this one, you have to win in order to have an opportunity to go to a bowl game.
Other side of that coin, too, is the winner of this one has a shot at a winning regular season record.
True.
The loser does not. The best the loser can do is 50-50.
Well, maybe in the regular season, but if you go and
regular season, I'm talking about regular season. The winner of this has the opportunity next week to have a winning record in the regular season.
Yes.
The loser does not. The best they can do is 6-6 in the regular season.
Yeah. So that's two big things, right? That are riding on this game. being able to talk about a winning season and being able to know going into the last game of the season that you are going to go to a bowl game. In a
Yep.
year where we're talking about will there be enough 6-6 teams, you get to 6 wins, you're going to go. That's
Yeah.
basically what it is. You have teams like Jacksonville State and James Madison for that, hoping that there aren't enough 6-6 teams so that they can get a bowl game. The last real bullet point that might be flying under the radar for some fans is this is a matchup of two really good running backs, because we know what Rasheen Ali is. We know because we follow him very closely as Herd fans. But LaDamian Webb is a great running back for South Alabama. These are two of the top 7 in the Sun Belt Conference. So that'll be a nice little game within the game to see who has the better, provides the most impact for their individual team. Now, let's get into what this game actually looks and feels like to you just from the surface.
It feels like a must win, as we just covered. It's on the road. This was one of those tests when we saw the out of conference schedule and then the in conference cross division schedule. We said, man, we've got it tough. We've got to go to South Alabama, was one of the points that we made. So preseason, off season, this was one of those games we had circled, was this is going to be tough. A lot of people expected them to push for and or be the favorite to win that West Division. It was them and Troy almost in a 2-man race, if you remember, on what everyone was predicting. We knew LaDamian Webb was going to be great. He's had a great career there. And, they went, didn't they play and beat UTSA in the bowl last? Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't remember.
I'd have to look it up, but I'm fairly certain they beat UTSA. Now watch me be wrong. If so, it'll be the only time we were ever wrong on this show. But anyway, coming into the season, I was expecting a lot out of South Alabama.
Yeah.
I do feel like they've underachieved. I feel like we've underachieved, just like you said. Both of these teams have a lot left to play for, just so you can get that extra practice time, that extra developmental time for your players, and just for the fans and the preseason goals. Everyone says, yeah, we want to be good enough to go to a bowl game, So
yeah.
There's going to be a lot on the line, and I look for this to be a hard-fought game because of that.
Well, now it's hard fought for a different reason, because we both thought we were going to be really good and vying for like jockeying for bowl position. But now we're both struggling at 500, and it's going to be tough because we're both still kind of in the same position as teams. But what you gain is different. Now you're gaining just bowl eligibility. And one house cleaning note real quick. You've confused South Alabama with Troy. It was Troy that played UTSA in the Cure Bowl. South Alabama actually got boat raced by Western Kentucky last year in the New Orleans Bowl, 44-23. But they still were a 10-3 ball club despite that loss. So
we'll just edit that out. What I said, no big deal.
No big deal. It's not a big deal at all. So let's talk about one point before I get into these indicators. Now, this season could have gone despite the struggles here. They lost the head-to-head matchup with Troy. And you flip those games, and now maybe these last 2 games of the year really mean a little something more, because you don't know what happens with those 2 teams, right? But in that game, Carter Bradley did not play for South Alabama, and they lost, in that Troy game. And that was one that those fans really, really wanted. And it was a 28-10 loss at Troy, and they were without their QB1 in that game. So speaking of Carter Bradley, let's talk about some of these players, right? Because as far as we know, Carter Bradley's back. He's played the last couple of games. There's no reason to think he's not going to play this week. So number 2, quarterback Carter Bradley, 6'3", 216-pound senior, 186 out of 279 on the season, 2,301 yards, 15 touchdowns versus 7 interceptions. He's got 37 carries total on the season from like a rush standpoint for negative 11 yards in 9 games. Remember, he's missed 1 game. Did not play against Troy. Only 2 games all season does he have a positive rushing total. Okay, that's it. And one of them was like 1.8 yards. His Best game of the season was like 9.5 yards. Okay. So this is not a very mobile quarterback at all. It's like the very definition of pocket passer. Okay. Number 3, running back LaDamian Webb, 5'7", 210-pound senior, 162 carries for 890 yards, 15 touchdowns on the season, good for 5.5 yards per carry, 22 receptions, also 140 yards on the year, no touchdowns through the air. Nice little, added kind of thing in the playbook there for Mr. Webb. He's not just an exclusive runner. He can make some plays in the pass game. He's got those 15 touchdowns, though, are ahead of Rasheen Ali by 1, but he's got, I want 110. I need 110 yards. He wants to get to that 1,000-yard threshold. Can't blame him. Why wouldn't you want that? Then number 4, wide receiver Cullen Lacey, 5'10", 190-pound junior, leads the team in receptions, yards, with 71 receptions. The only SBC wide receiver right now over 1,000 yards receiving, and it's Mr. Lacey with 1,096. 6 touchdowns, good for 15.4 yards per reception. He's also, by the way, number 30 in the nation in punt return yard averaging 8.1 yards per punt return. Just for context, we just got off the heels of playing Caleb Hood, who was a really good punt returner. Ranks a little bit higher, but Hood's only not only, he's 9.3 yards per punt return. So a full yard sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but still, that tells you how good that Colin Lacey is as a punt returner. Then number 12, wide receiver Jamal Pritchett, 5'8", 164-pound sophomore, 44 receptions for 650 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air, 14.8 yards per reception. That's number 9 in the SBC. So South Alabama boasts the number 1 and number 9 wide receivers in the conference. It's pretty damn good. They average 29 and 29.9 points per game. So might as well call it 30. That's good for 7th in the Sun Belt Conference. The Herd is allowing 29 points a game. That's 11th in the Sun Belt, by the way, on 423 yards straight across the board as the number 7 offense in the SBC. 423 yards, 7th. 258 pass yards, 7th. 165 rush yards per game, 7th in the SBC. Russ, what do you think about this South Alabama offense?
Well, they got a lot of weapons, and it doesn't seem to be spread out, and you don't have 5 different wide receivers that are threats. You've got 2 main wide receivers that are threats. They've got 11 of their 16 touchdowns on receptions. The running back, he has a touchdown in every game except for the opening game of the year, which was against Tulane. Where he was 9 rushes for 40 yards and no touchdowns with a long of 10. Every other game, he's got at least 1 touchdown. He threw up 4 against USM. He can go off. He had 163 yards last week. He had 151 against Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm.
So, he can run. He can put points on the board. And Bradley, great quarterback to do it, to throw it to him.
Yeah.
So they have some weapons, and they can score. They're just under 30 points a game on average. 29.2.
Call it 30.
29.9, is that what it was? So, yeah, right at 30 points a game. So this is an explosive offense that we're going to be going up against.
Yeah, it's a very, very not very, very, but a very balanced offense. Like you said last week, you expect to see more passing yards than rushing yards by an offense just by nature, right? But it's not a air raid that we just got off the heels of playing, and it's not this run-only offense, but they can hurt you through the air and on the ground. And if Marshall can put together the semblance of a defensive effort that we saw against Georgia Southern, then this sets up really good for Marshall, right? Our young DBs that I think have turned a corner. We talked about that needing to happen last week. They needed to notch up last week, and by and large, they did that. So I think we're now in the area where they've turned that corner, and the floor is a new floor for these youngsters, and to really only having to account for 2 or 3 main primary weapons as opposed to 5 or 6 has got to lighten the load for them,
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the toughest thing is going to be can they wrangle LaDamian Webb? We've seen some pretty good run defensive efforts the past couple of weeks. I like the trend there, but can they do it against this particular back? Because he's, like you said, he's explosive. He's a lot like Ali, a lot like Ali.
Mhm.
He's just not quite the same. I guess if you want to make waves, if you can identify where one thing this herd has a legitimate advantage, is the fact that Carter Bradley is going to be a drop back passer. You don't have to worry about him eluding all these sacks and busting 30-yard runs. He can do it. I mean, we've seen Chad Pennington do that, and he's not known as a runner either. But it tells me that he's going to stand in the pocket for the most part. And that means that Marshall can do some damage there, because we know our guys can rush the passer. Let's talk about this Jaguars defense. It starts at the second level. Honestly, those linebackers, all three of them are 1, 2, and 3 on the team in tackles. It starts with number 10 linebacker Quentin Wilfon, 6'1", 248. He's a senior, leads the team in tackles with 70. Leads the team in solo tackles with 39, and leads the team in sacks with 4.5. He also adds a forced fumble and a pass defended to that resume. Then you go to number 4 linebacker James Miller, 6'1", 228. He's a senior. 61 total tackles, 23 of those solo, and a fumble recovery to his resume. So you don't really see that big drop off, like from 80 tackles to 40 tackles, like we've seen a couple of times with our opponents. And then you go to the third leading tackler, number 22, Trey Kaiser, 6 foot, 224, also a senior, basically mirror images, 6 foot to 6'1", all these guys between 224 and 248. 60 total tackles for Mr. Kaiser. So you go 70, 61, 60. Equal production across that second level. 23 solo tackles, second on the team with 3.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 2 passes defended for Mr. Kaiser. And then we're going to round it out with number 2, the safety, Jaden Voisin, 6 foot, 205. He's a junior. 57 total tackles, 23 of those solo, leads the team with 3 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and 5 passes defended added to his resume. Impact plays for this South Alabama defense. They've got 25 team sacks on the year, 7 interceptions, 8 forced fumbles, 7 fumble recoveries, and 24 passes defended. As good as this defense is, and they're good, I'm going to get to the rankings here in a second, they have absolutely 0 defensive touchdowns scored this entire season, which is a little surprising. They allow 21.1 points per game on defense, which is number 3 in the Sun Belt Conference. They allow 324 yards per game, which is number 2 in the Sun Belt Conference, and 2s across the board. Number 2 in pass defense and rush defense, 200 yards a game allowed through the air, 124 on the ground. And they are top 35 nationally in both of those individual categories. But when you add them up to total defense, they are number 25 nationally in total defense. So this is a really good South Alabama defense. But it's wild to me. They're really good at not giving up yards, but they're not that great at getting points defensively. So I don't know what that means, but it's just an oddball stat. You would think you would at least see a pick six or a scoop and score something somewhere along the way. But anyway you look at it, Russ, this is a very stout defense. The Herd offense is going to have its work cut out. What do you got for this Jags defense?
So, quick question on your Sunbelt rankings there. That's still all games played in those
all
rankings.
Games played.
That's not just games played against the Sunbelt, right?
Right. That's 11 games or 10 games.
10 games.
Season.
They've got 10 games. Yeah. So I thought that was the case. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
No, it looks like they've got, you're looking at total tackles here of 70, 61, 60, and 57 for your top 4. And we only saw that one other game this year that we played against someone that had several people up there in high in tackles. That's a lot of tackles.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of assisted tackles. It looks like a gang tackling. One person kind of hits to wrap up, and then here comes 2 or 3 others to help out. And that to me is equally as impressive as a team, to where you have someone that's just a high individual solo tackle guy.
Mhm.
because this means team tackling. You might not get those breakaway runs, to where you can shed off that first tackle and then add another. Even 8 yards is a lot to add after that first contact. Where if they're doing a lot of gang tackling, you know, perhaps that's going to stifle first downs. Perhaps that's going to stifle flipping the field with a long run. So that could come into play. I
Yeah,
know that's extremely simplistic, but that's what football is.
but it's not though, because that's the exact vibe that I got. When you don't have, it's great to have a guy that's got 120, 130 tackles. That's really
Yeah,
cool. That's an awesome eye popping stat. But
yeah.
when you go from 110, 20, 30 all the way down to like 40,
Hmm.
you're thinking, man, what the heck that's
This is the
wild.
only guy. Yeah,
Yeah. And they're going to get their tackles. They're going to get their stats. They're going to be in on a lot of plays, not every play. You don't get those type of numbers just watching. But
hmm,
it's equally impressive, if not more so, like you're saying, when you have 4 guys, 5 guys that are all within 10 or 15 tackles of one another, because it's a team defense concept. And
yeah,
generally, you see that translate to overall team defense success. And we're seeing that right here with both Sunbelt rankings and national rankings. The only Sunbelt team that's ranking higher in defense than South Alabama from the Sunbelt is Troy.
yeah.
Right. So it's not surprising that both of those teams were considered favorites coming into the season. So, the Herd offense had struggled a month ahead of time, and we saw a little bit of a breakout against Georgia Southern. But now you walk right into Mobile, Alabama, and you're going to face a top Sun Belt Conference defense against the pass and the run. And they don't give up a lot of points. So another reason where you say, all right, 10.5 might not be that, out of the realm of possibility when you're making a line on the game. I'm not saying that I expect that to happen. I'm just saying, oh, well, and you start looking, adding these things up. Now you start to say, okay, well, maybe 10's not as egregious, as disrespectful as we thought it was, just because it wasn't 7 or 6.5 or something like that. Let's talk about a place kicker, number 36, Diego Guajardo, 6 foot 185. He's a senior, 10 of 14 on field goals this year with a long of 46. He's just 3 of 7 from 40 plus, though. 33 of 35 on extra points. I already mentioned that Colin Lacey is kind of the key guy in the return game for them. I went to the FBS stats from the NCAA. They got nobody in the top 50-ish in kick returns, anything like that. It's just, it must be punts or that's it. So I don't know how many of percentage of kickoffs they're facing that go out of bounds or anything like that, but that's a distinct area that where Marshall has a massive edge, because of course we know our guy Jaden Harrison is number 1 in the country in both kick return yards average per return and kick returns for touchdown. So if I'm Kane Womack, I'm not sure I kick any to Jaden Harrison this week, but hey, we'll let them decide if they want to do that or not. Russ, how about some keys to the game for the Herd? What does Marshall have to do to go into Mobile, Alabama, line up across from South Alabama, get a win, and gain bowl eligibility while also simultaneously keeping a winning season on the table?
Number one for me, and this is probably ranked. I usually don't rank these, but this one in particular, I think, is the key. Is stop LaDamian Webb. And if you look at his yards in losses versus yards in their wins, uh, up until or there's only one game where he had 100 yards rushing that they actually lost the game. Uh, Everything else, you hold him below 100, totally different ball game. Listen to this. We've got Tulane. I already mentioned he had 9 carries, 40 yards, only 4.4 on the average, no touchdowns. They lost. Uh, and I said that backwards earlier. He had one game where he didn't rush for 100 that they actually won, and that was the
Right.
very next game, Southeastern Louisiana. 7 carries, 81 yards, 11.6 average, 2 touchdowns. It's not like he wasn't productive. They just pulled him early, you
So,
know?
but still, so the outlier there is the only time that happened was against an FCS opponent.
Yeah.
So they have not achieved that little
Yeah.
stat against an FBS opponent, much less a Sun Belt Conference opponent.
Then he went for 151 against Oklahoma State, and they won. Then 2 straight losses. He had 68 on 18 carries, 36 on 12 carries, and then they lost both those games. Then the next 2 games they won, he had 100 and 102 with both over 5 yards per carry. Next game was a loss, 96 yards. Next game was a loss, 53 yards. And then last week was a win, 163 yards. Keep him below 100. He's still scoring touchdowns. He's still getting good yards per carry. Like one of those losses, he went 16 for 96, had a touchdown and a 6.0 average. But they still lost the game, and he was still below 100. Now, correlation, causation, I know all about that stuff. But if you're going to win against South Alabama, it looks like you need to stop LaDamian Webb, or at least control him and keep him below production average.
Yeah, that I think is absolutely a valid point of emphasis, because like I said earlier, the guy wants to get his 110 yards, wants to get to that 1,000 point or that 1,000 yard, like not plateau, but goal tier, whatever, for the season, with one more game to play to see how much he can add to that. So let's get that one out of the way. That's an absolute huge point of emphasis. And that's why I absolutely put that this is a matchup between two great backs. I usually don't say things like that, but you got Rasheen Ali, who's, already, it's weird, man. I went to one website, they said Ali's got 1,000 yards. I went to the other website, they said he didn't. And it wasn't like 998, it was like 890. It's like a whole game missing. So I'm thinking like, all right, what the hell's going on here? So I don't know what to believe right now, but both of them are, if they're not at 1,000, both of them want to get to 1,000. So this is equally as important for Rasheen Ali. So that leads into my number one key to victory for Marshall. This has got to be the Rasheen Ali show again. It was the Rasheen Ali show last week at home against Georgia Southern, and it needs to be the Rasheen Ali show again this week on the road. I think he needs to go for 120 plus. I think he needs to have 2+ touchdowns, and we saw a fumble that was recovered by Cole Pennington last week. I think that absolutely needs to go away this week. We're talking about a 20+ carry game. We're talking, we need that 6 yard per carry average, couple 2-3 touchdowns. It's got to be the Rasheen Ali show in this showdown against LaDamian Webb in Mobile. What's your number 2?
Number 2 is we have got to lock down their top 2 wide receivers, Lacey and Pritchett. I mentioned earlier, it's not a situation where the top 5 were productive. Was that against Georgia Southern last week?
They had 3 guys. Nobody went over 100, but they had 3 guys that were close.
No, I mean coming into the game when we were doing a preview,
yeah.
we were going over someone that had 5 different guys.
That was him, because I was comparing yardage to how they would rank against Marshall's leaders.
That's right. So this week it's the top 2, and that's it. So if we can put putting in a Micah Abraham performance and get someone else locking down the other guy, and you're holding them both down, you're coming in with 71 receptions, 44 receptions, 6 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, lots of yards from both of them, deep threats, yards after the catch, ability to take it to the house. If you lock those guys down and you're keeping them off the scoreboard, that drastically improves our chances, just like with Webb. So my top 2 keys are our defense are going to have to shut down these weapons.
Yep. I could have easily done that same thing, but this week I went top 3, our defense for me as well. It's just that point for me ended up at number 3, but I'll go ahead and talk about it now. And I say you got to blanket those 2 through 5 receivers, just like you're saying. Because I don't know what Marshall normally does. I don't pay that close attention. I don't know if Micah Abraham covers a side of the field or if he follows a receiver, depending on whatever side of the field that guy goes to. But I'm just going to think that Micah Abraham is going to be on Colin Lacey all game long. Why would he not be? Right? Because he's your number 1 defensive back against the only wide receiver in the Sun Belt Conference to have over 1,000 yards. It makes sense to me that you keep those 2 guys matched up all game long, right? And if he's going to make some noise, he's going to have to do it against our best defensive back in coverage. But that's why I said earlier that I think we've seen the floor for these young DBs raised, because they're going to have to blanket those 2 through 5 guys. JJ Roberts is is more active in the tackling department than coverage. He still plays pretty decent coverage, but
Yeah.
you see him in on 10 plus tackles a game. So he's not spending his time from a safety position running with receivers. You know what I mean? So I think you're going to see guys like De'Ani Hill, A.G. McGee, Jacoby Henderson again. They're going to have to play a huge role in this back end for Marshall. I just hope that Micah Abraham, like you said, turns in a Micah Abraham performance. I think he's due for another interception. He's due. He's been making some really great plays in coverage. He just hasn't come down with one in a couple of games, and I think it's time. I think it was maybe against James Madison was the last time we saw an interception for Micah. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right on that. And it just feels like he has the potential. They're going to obviously target Lacey a lot. So there's going to be an opportunity there for Micah to maybe go up and get his hands on a ball or two and change the course of this game and give the ball back to his offense a couple of times. So what's your number 3?
Number 3 is we've got to continue the creative offense that we saw last week to be able to put up points. How many points? I'm saying 35. We have to game plan that 35 is our goal to put up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can we win the game without that? Absolutely. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that we need to say, how are we going to score 5 touchdowns? How are we going to convert 5 of our drives into touchdowns? I think that is a realistic goal against someone that is averaging 30 points a game, that we say, how are we going to get our 5? Okay. Last week we got 3 from that Wildcat formation that we talked about. And it's not really the Wildcat when we run it, it's the Thundercat. So
I don't know why I didn't think about that.
Well, it is, and I have to give a shout out to my old pal Michael Massetti for reminding me that. But fairly certain that we called that, you and I included, called it that back in around the 2008 when we were running that in the Snyder years. Can't even remember. I know Cody Slate ran it a couple times, but there was another wide receiver that we had that time. Might have been Passmore
Maybe.
that was there. But anyway, get in that Thundercat and let's get some formations, the double stacks. We saw the double pass going again this week, and it would have gone for a long run. We just have to keep that creative thing, is how are we going to get these points on the board? How are we going to score these touchdowns? So that's what I want to see this week for goal number 3.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, man. When your defense is now allowing through 10 games, allowing 29 points per game, it's there. That's what you've done. Now we've gotten a little bit better, right? At least even if the point total isn't there, the defensive effort has been there. So, if we can start to play a little bit better of complementary football, maybe that point total goes down, because we did a pretty decent job of containing Georgia Southern, even though they got 33, we were able to outpace that. And you're right. 5 touchdowns. You got to get to 35. I'm not sure that 28 will win this game. I just am not sure that it will do that. My number 3, which is actually my number 2 key to victory, is I think they're going to have to get to Carter Bradley because he does not pose a running threat as part of his normal game. It's going to have to be a play breaks down and he gets away from a sack and something opens up type thing for him to be a factor in the run game. They don't do designed runs with Carter Bradley. The numbers just say that. When you have played in 9 games and in 7 of those 9 games, you have a negative rushing total, you're not a runner. And that's just not part of their offense. So I think Marshall's going to have to get to Carter Bradley. They've allowed 21 sacks in 9 games, so a little over 2 per game. And I think Marshall's going to have to get probably 4, maybe more. Time's running out on some of these guys. Their seasons are drawing thin. Guys like Owen Porter, Sam Burton, they're not going to get to strap up the helmet a couple more times, 3 if we're fortunate and take care of business this week. So I'd say, remember last year in November, Huff talked about seniors. We don't talk about senior day. They get them to start processing their process. If I'm coming back, guys that might be on the fence about coming back, they start processing that in November. They wanted a month to get their mind right and stuff. So these guys that are going to be exhausting eligibility have probably been in that frame of mind. And I think 75-week drives home a lot of that for these guys, right? That, wow, I'm coming to the end of my herd career. And I think that provides such a different level of motivation. These guys stay on level 100 all the time, but how do they push past the red line, and do something a little bit more? And when you have a goal like winning seasons on the table, bowl eligibilities on the table, we know we have a quarterback that's not known for his mobility. I think that makes you want to pin your ears back a little bit more and get a little extra drive, a little extra get off, a little extra something. So I think they're going to have to get to Carter Bradley 4 times, 5 times. This might need to be the marquee performance in the sack category this week to get that win. That's kind of what it feels like to me. So what's your number 4?
Keep them out of the red zone. And the reason is, obviously, you want to do that every game. But in particular here, you look at the kicking game. If we can force field goals out of here, you already said 3 out of 7 on the year from 40 and above, 46 being the longest. That's getting to the 29-yard line, and he got that. Anything beyond the 29, 30 and on, you're not going to see points on the board if what he has done so far this year sticks.
Mm-hmm.
Last 3 games, he's had 1. We're talking about the kicker here, Gallardo. 1 field goal, and it was 29 yards in the last 3 games. That's 2 losses and a 7-point win over Arkansas State. So I like our chances if we can do everything we can to keep that field position down there and keep them out of the red zone, to force those longer field goals, or to make them just say, hey, we're going to have to go for it. Hey, we're going to have to punt, try to pin them back deep, whatever it is. I like our chances to keep points off the board if we can keep them out of the red zone.
I can't argue, I mean,
and again, I mean, everybody can say, well, no crap, Russ, if you keep them out of the red zone. But I feel like that's a key to this particular game is we need to keep this team out of the red zone, limit their red zone attempts, and that will drastically help us. Can they still score from outside of the red zone? Absolutely. Any team can. Yeah. But if we have to force them into decisions of going for it on 4th down, punting to try to pin us back and they miss and we get it on the 20, or situation where they botch a snap or something, we get a better field position, or they kick a field goal and we get it where the ball was. I really like those chances.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is, of course, the red zone begins at the 20-yard line, right? Mm-hmm. And if you can push that just back to the 25, if the 25-yard line becomes your new red zone for this game, sure, then that means your field goal attempts are 42 yards. Mm-hmm. And it's wild to think that 5-yard difference could be a huge factor in this game, right? Number 4 for me is something that you kind of alluded to when we were talking about the South Alabama defense, but I think the Herd has to make this one their own this week. It's making the first hit count, right? You can't have any extra yards after contact in the run game or the pass game. While Marshall's going to be trying to pin their ears back a little bit, maybe extra, and get to Carter Bradley, which kind of sets you up for more yardage allowed in a run scenario, because you can just blow right past a blitzing defender or a pass rushing defender. That's why you don't play pass defense and rush defense the exact same. But even if that happens, whoever gets that first hit has to be the guy that slows up Webb or slows up Lacey or whoever in order for that second and third guy to come in and maybe bust the ball loose, but definitely stop the play where the first initial contact occurs. I want to make them have to be 50% plus from third down, because if they're earning first downs by taking 3 downs to get it, that's one thing. But if they're constantly living on first and second down, that's a whole nother thing entirely, right? And for one that has a lot on the line for both teams, I think the team who plays that best swarming type of defense, limits those yards after contact on their opponent, is probably going to have a big edge in this one. This might come down to a street fight type thing where you're just punching and punching and punching before somebody finally lands the last knockout blow. Kind of like, what we saw, not necessarily in the last 4 minutes against Georgia Southern. We saw 2 quick touchdowns in the last 4 minutes, but leading into that, that's what that was. It was a punch for punch type thing. And somebody made one more play, and it was, how Marshall got the win. Do you have an MVP in this one?
I do. I think it's back again to Rasheen Ali. I think if he puts up 150, again, not necessary, but I think if he puts up 150, 2 or 3 touchdowns, I like our chances. And I think that opens up our offense so much to where it's not just his performance. It's at that point, we look at receivers getting open more. We look at them not being able to stop him, the field flips and everything. It just opens up the playbook. It opens up everything. So I think he has been the gear that runs the machine for us for 2 years. Well, not last year, but
still
his
2 years.
his 2 years. His 2 years that he played.
Yeah.
When he was not injured, he was the gear that ran our machine, and I don't see that stopping. I think he puts up a big performance to be the MVP in this one.
Well, unsurprisingly, he is also my MVP because he was my number 1 key to victory. I don't think Marshall has a shot if Rasheen Ali doesn't produce, if he exits the game early, if he is the stats that you talked about, LaDamian Webb, if he's a 10 carries for 60 yards, I don't think this one is Marshall's day, right? He's going to have to go over 120 with a couple of touchdowns in order for me to feel really good, because that means undoubtedly he's probably broken a big one for a touchdown, maybe 2, maybe he has 3 of those mid-tier type runs, 30 yards or so for touchdown. It's going to be hard yards. We heard Huff talk about that. He said that this one was going to be a lot like the NC State game, where there were going to be hard yards and you were going to have to earn it. And there, and the stats say that for South Alabama, they just don't give up a lot of rushing yards, but they also haven't played Rasheen Ali. So you can't go into the game and say, well, this is this great defense, they're going to stifle us. And because there is something to be said about the greatness of Rasheen Ali. He can take great defenses head on and give that defense their worst performance of the season. We've seen him do it before. We're just going to need him to do it this week in order for us to have a chance. If I've got just something to piggyback off of that, it's sort of what you said. If he's drawing extra eyes, allowing for that extra half step for our receivers to get open, then this might be one of those games where it's get what you can get and be happy with moving the chains. We saw last week, DeMarcus Harris was able to bust loose a couple of times and get a lot of yards after contact, and that's great, man. And if it's there, by all means, take it. But what I don't want to see is what we saw late in the game where Caleb Coombs was trying to make a play and the ball gets popped out. So I'm okay with these receivers taking what they get, especially in traffic. Just make the catch and take your 8 yards. If you've got a one-on-one scenario or you've got a crossing route or you've got a slant, and go type thing, and you've got a step and you can make something more happen, then do that. But, please don't put us in a situation to where we're turning the ball over when we've got something going. I can't rely on Cole Pennington to have 2 fumble recoveries every game, right? Because he does that once and now he leads the team in fumble recoveries. So that tells me we're not doing a great job of recovering fumbles this season. Russ, what do you got for a score prediction?
Well, I see us doing that creative offense that I talked about, and I see us getting 5 scores. I see us winning 35-24.
Tight one. I've got it even tighter because this is a road game.
35-24 is not all that tight, man.
Well,
when we're a 10.5, when we're a 10.5 underdog.
I never take into account the Vegas line, because I'm not a betting man, and that to me, even 10 points is fairly convincing. I mean, I know that's 11, but a 10-point win is a turnover that leads to a touchdown. It's and one extra play here and there. So that's tight enough for me, but I've got it even tighter, man. I don't know why. I am just scared a little bit because this
Mm-hmm.
is another one of those have to have it and it's on the road.
Mm-hmm.
If we were going on the road for the final game, maybe I'd feel better, having 2 games at home, because you could tell there was definite relief for the Herd being back at home on a Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
That was a difference. So now they're right back out of town again, but I still like the Herd to take care of business. I like that we have enough guys that I think the headspace is in the right enough headspaces are in the right place that Marshall's going to go down and make this thing happen. 31-30 Herd securing bowl eligibility. I've got a lot of respect for South Alabama on defense. I think they can score some points on offense too. We have a lot of question marks. Not trying to say we don't, but I just like them to get it done. I feel like that was it was so much of a much needed win last week. I think it's enough to catapult the Herd to make the last 3 games of the regular season count. 31-30. Russ, do you have any final words for South Alabama?
I do not. If I had to come up with any, I'm just harking back to that preseason. We had goals of much more. We had goals of the Sunbelt Conference championship and stuff, but we definitely thought winning season. And now you've got to win the final 2. I just see us really having that grit the rest of the year. We're putting that bad skid behind us. I'm hoping that we do have a lot of fans going down there and giving us some support. I won't be there. It'll be my first game since Georgia State and only the 3rd game this year that I will miss. But we're going to need fan support. It's a good team, but I really see us coming down there and turning over the apple cart and coming out with a win.
Well, I've got one final point that I'm going to make about South Alabama and what the Herd is going to walk into. I went back and was curious, right? I don't know anything about South Alabama historically. We've never played them before, right? Never had a reason to dive into the program. So I just went back and I was curious. What does their attendance look like? What kind of environment is Marshall going to walk into this week? And it's very up and down, and it's now trending downward, right? They opened the season, Tulane, just under 27,000. Pretty respectable. Their stadium holds 30. Didn't sell out for Tulane. Then they had a home game against Central Michigan, 18,000. Then they had James Madison, 26,000. Then they had a game against Louisiana, which is always highly contested, and there's always a lot of hype around those games. They've been playing for a while. 16,700 people. Last week against Arkansas State, 15,000 people. Now we know Troy has sealed up the Sun Belt West Division. It is senior day for South Alabama, but oftentimes senior day goes underattended for Marshall too. I don't know how much of a factor that's going to play in for them. It would not surprise me if Marshall goes into this game with a crowd under 14,000 people. And that to me just does not say intimidation. It just is not an intimidating environment. I don't care if they happen to turn out and there's 20,000 people there. I don't think that's going to happen with them, being out of contention for the Sun Belt. Yeah, they're playing for bowl eligibility, but it just doesn't feel like they're going to pack the house for the Herd. A lot of people that otherwise wouldn't go might go because it's the first ever matchup and they want to see the first ever game with Marshall too. But your 2 biggest games were against Tulane, which was a ranked opponent, one of the top 2 or 3 G5 teams in the country this year. And your other one was James Madison, an undefeated James Madison, who is also one of the top 2, 3 G5 teams in the country. Marshall's not that, in fairness. We're not one of the top 2 or 3. I just would not be surprised if we walk in to a less than lively stadium to where that is not going to be an excuse. It is not going to be a factor in the game. Call me crazy, but I just don't see it. It would not surprise me to see them have less than 14,000 at this game. The one final thing I wanted to mention is I told you, we've said it several times, this is the first ever matchup. We've got 3 teams in this conference that we have yet to play against, and I just wanted to touch on it real quick. 2 of those are going to be eliminated in the next 2 weeks. We're going to play South Alabama this week for the first time. We're going to play Arkansas State for the first time next week. That leaves lonely Texas State as the only team remaining in the Sun Belt that Marshall will have to play. And we'll see whenever they find their way to the schedule. Russ, I've got nothing else. Herd's going to take care of business. I'm all but, I can't guarantee it, but I feel really good about this. Even though I have it a 31-30 game, I think the Herd takes care of business. Go ahead and take us out of here if you got nothing else.
All right, whether you see us at the Joan, whether you see us at the Cam, or whether you see us rooting on our Herd from the comforts of our own couches this week, no matter where you see us, we'll be saying, go Herd.
Go Herd, it's the ThunderCast. We will see you early next week for a South Alabama recap. Later.